Hi, my name is Kate Delaney, and my partner Maggie Malone and I will be explaining the biomechanics of the sport of pole vaulting. Throughout our presentation, you will learn about the sport, a little bit about its history, and the biomechanical principles involved that make pole vaulting possible. So what is pole vaulting? Pole vaulting is a track and field event that involves the athlete performing a maximum vertical jump over a horizontal bar with the aid of a pole. The pole can be of any material, such as bamboo or fiberglass. It can even be of wood. The event area is set up such that the bar is held up by two uprights at the end of a long and straight track. The bar is designed to fall down with any force of contact in order to judge if the athlete clears that height or not. The athlete must run down the track holding a pole, place the end of the pole in a slide box centered on the track between the uprights, and use the pole to vault over the bar. A mistrial occurs when the bar falls off of the uprights. The end goal of each athlete is to clear the highest height with the least number of mistrials. So a little bit about the history of pole vaulting. Pole vaulting has been around for a long time and has been recorded as early as the 16th century in Holland. And originally the sport was not a sport at all, but used for practical uses such as clearing ditches and canals. Modern pole vaulting appeared in the late 1850s in Germany as a sport for pleasure rather than practicality. It became an Olympic sport for men soon after, and in 2000 it became an Olympic sport for women.
So the pole vault is broken up into 6 different phases: the grip and carry approach, the takeoff, the follow through, the swing, the invert and release, and the clearance phase. For the purpose of the rest of this presentation, we will focus strictly on the takeoff phase of the vault, which you can see a depiction of in the upper middle box. So this image shows the phases in order from left to right.
So here's a little bit more about the takeoff phase. So in this video, we'll be focusing on this phase and the biomechanical principles involved with it. This phase is not complicated, although it's a critical part of the vault. So in the phase, the arms should be spread about shoulder width apart, with the top hand gripping near the top of the pole, and the bottom arm should be slightly bent to allow for shoulder rotation. The takeoff foot should push off of the ground in a fast and powerful motion into a full extension, while the opposite leg should be driven forward into a 90-degree flexion at the hip.
So this is an athlete who demonstrated only the takeoff phase of the vault, and we paused this particular video at the points we want to focus on, so you can get a better feel for what this phase looks like. So one of the biomechanical concepts we'll be talking about is the velocity. So takeoff or run-up velocity is significantly positively correlated with peak vault height. So the greater the velocity, the higher the vaulter would go. However, horizontal velocity decreases during takeoff as a result of 3 main reasons: a reorientation of the vaulter's center of gravity at the last step to allow for the jump, the shock generated by the planting of the pole, and the initiation of the bending of the pole. Vaulters have a takeoff velocity oriented at a particular angle above the horizontal, and in a study by Linthorne and colleagues, larger angles have been found to produce slower takeoff velocities. The same study claimed that the optimal takeoff angle for vault height is 18 degrees. So with this in mind, when we primarily regard velocity as correlated to peak vault height and that velocity is decreased by greater takeoff angles, it is beneficial for the vaulter to favor a forward-directed takeoff to keep the angle small and minimize loss in horizontal velocity. It is also important that the vaulter uses the right pole. For example, fiberglass poles reduce the shock the vaulter experiences by the pole, which we know would usually slow the horizontal velocity, so less energy is dissipated in the vaulter's body, so takeoff velocity is higher.
So the second biomechanical concept that applies to the takeoff phase of pole vaulting is the transfer of energy. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy can neither be created or destroyed, only transferred or changed from one form to another. During the takeoff, the horizontal kinetic energy of the vaulter decreases because the vaulter begins to move in the vertical direction and slows down in the horizontal direction almost completely. This kinetic energy is converted to several different forms. Some of it is dissipated throughout the body and lost as heat, while a portion of it is lost between the interaction between the athlete and the pole, like Maggie just mentioned. And this is most likely due to the friction between the pole and the takeoff box. Most importantly, the horizontal kinetic energy is converted to strain energy in the pole. The strain energy allows for the pole to vault the athlete upwards. This occurs because when the pole recoils, the strain energy is converted to potential energy that is used by the vaulter. Therefore, the greater the strain energy, the higher the athlete can vault. This concept can be applied by pole vaulters to improve performance. An athlete could develop a higher horizontal kinetic energy prior to takeoff so that more energy is converted to strain energy in the pole. The equation for kinetic energy is 1/2 of mass times velocity squared. Therefore, kinetic energy can be increased by increasing running velocity. Additionally, an athlete could increase muscle mass to increase their kinetic energy. This increase in weight was also found by Linthorne and colleagues to limit energy dissipation throughout the body and therefore limit energy loss through heat. Finally, the more flexible the pole, the more strain energy stored in it. Stressing an object stores energy in it, and more flexible objects are able to withstand more stress. This is where pole material becomes important. Although any material is allowed in competition, the athlete should choose the pole that is right for their weight, technique, and speed. It should be flexible enough to store maximum energy in it, but also stiff enough that it finishes recoiling as the athlete's peak vertical height. In most cases, fiberglass is the optimal material due to its flexibility.
So the most prevalent example of force and torque during takeoff occurs when the pole hits the box. The abrupt stoppage of the pole in combination with the vaulter's forward inertia creates a bending force on the pole. The resulting reaction force that the pole exerts on the vaulter creates a forward or counterclockwise torque about the vaulter's center of mass that causes the vaulter to rotate in that direction. In the study by Linthorne and colleagues, they found that the ground reaction force of the pole decreased when a bending moment was applied to the top of the pole. The greater the distance between the vaulter's hands on the pole induced resultant opposite forces from each hand, which caused this torque that bent the pole and ultimately decreased the ground reaction force. This allowed the vaulter who was using a flexible pole to have a higher upper hand grip without increasing their takeoff angle, which, as we discussed earlier, we want to keep relatively small to minimize loss in horizontal velocity to preserve kinetic energy. The opposite forces that come from each hand during the wider grip have been found to permit an earlier and more controlled bending of the pole. With this in mind, it becomes obvious that the pole vaulter can improve performance by widening their grip on the pole, and flexible poles can make it easier to keep the hands further apart. So it would be beneficial for the vaulter to use a flexible pole as well. So to conclude what we've discussed, pole vaulting is a complex sport, and we only focused on one of its many phases, the takeoff phase. We discussed 3 biomechanical principles of this phase: velocity, energy transfer, and torque, and how these principles can be applied to improve performance of the event.
Thank you for watching our video.